There was a time when bringing in a consultant meant something very specific. It meant fresh perspective entering a closed system, new patterns of thinking arriving from outside the organization, people who had seen dozens of architectures, dozens of failures, dozens of recoveries. Consultants were not just hired to do work. They were hired to bring exposure. An experienced specialist would walk into an organization carrying knowledge gathered across many environments, different companies, different industries, different mistakes. That outside experience would collide with the internal team's domain knowledge. The people inside the company understood the business. They understood the constraints, the legacy systems, the unwritten rules behind decisions that made no sense on paper. When those two perspectives mixed well, something powerful happened. The consultant introduced new approaches. The internal team adapted those approaches to their reality. Over time, the team absorbed some of that knowledge. Capability inside the organization grew stronger. That exchange was always one of the hidden benefits of consulting. And importantly, consultants were rarely there to understand the business better than the business itself. Their role was more precise. They were specialists brought in to solve specific classes of problems: database performance, security architecture, cloud migrations, network resilience, DevOps transformations. They carried deep expertise in a narrow slice of the technical universe. The internal team carried the context. That balance made the relationship work. But something is shifting now. Artificial intelligence is quietly changing how quickly knowledge can move between those two groups, not because AI replaces expertise, but because it dramatically compresses the time it takes to understand complex systems. 5 years ago, onboarding someone into a complicated architecture could take months. Documentation had to be gathered, systems explained, diagrams recreated. Engineers sat in meeting rooms while someone walked through the layers of infrastructure piece by piece. Today, an AI system can ingest architecture diagrams, vendor documentation, code repositories, and configuration files and turn that information into explanations that are conversational and interactive. A new engineer can ask questions and explore the design in real time. A complex environment that once required months of exposure can sometimes be explained in a single day. This changes the economics of expertise. Research from McKinsey's 2023 report on generative AI estimates that productivity in knowledge work could increase by 20 to 40% across many professional roles. Meanwhile, studies from MIT and Stanford examining AI-assisted coding show developers completing tasks faster while also learning patterns through interaction with the AI tools themselves. So AI is not just accelerating output. It is accelerating learning, and that matters because for decades consulting has often operated under a particular economic model: time and materials, billable hours. Under that model, the consultant's value was measured partly through the time invested in analysis, design, documentation, and delivery. Expertise required time. Time justified cost, but if AI compresses effort, the clock becomes a strange measuring device. A consultant who once needed 2 weeks to analyze an architecture and produce recommendations might now do it in 2 days with the assistance of AI. From a productivity standpoint, that is fantastic. From a time-based billing model, however, that improvement creates tension. The more effective the consultant becomes with AI, the fewer hours they may bill. This is one of the quiet economic shifts happening inside the consulting industry, but the change does not stop there, because AI does not just help consultants work faster. It helps internal teams learn faster. Engineers inside a company can now use AI to explore unfamiliar platforms, summarize vendor documentation, simulate architecture decisions, and generate working examples across multiple technologies. A small team that once relied heavily on outside specialists can ramp up far more quickly. AI becomes both assistant and teacher. It explains complex systems. It answers questions about integrations. It helps internal engineers coordinate across technologies they might not have used before. The effect is subtle but powerful. Internal teams augmented by AI can collaborate with specialists more effectively because they understand the landscape faster. This does not eliminate consultants. Deep experience still matters enormously. As Peter Drucker wrote decades ago, modern organizations depend on knowledge workers who accumulate specialized expertise through years of practice. But AI shifts where the value sits. Instead of being the only people who understand the system, consultants increasingly become the people who help shape the system. Their value moves toward guidance, architecture, judgment, and risk management. Harvard Business Review has observed similar transitions in professional services industries adapting to automation. Firms that thrive tend to move away from selling hours and toward selling outcomes. Strategic insight, architectural leadership, and capability transfer become the core offering. The consultant becomes less of a builder and more of a navigator, but there is another dimension to this story that deserves attention. AI is an amplifier, and amplification cuts both ways. When a skilled expert uses AI, their productivity increases dramatically. Their ability to analyze systems, generate documentation, and explore solutions accelerates, but the same amplification can also magnify poor practices. An inexperienced contractor who previously produced mediocre documentation or poorly structured code can now generate those artifacts at scale. Volume increases, quality does not necessarily improve. The same risk exists in consulting environments that measure performance through volume and time. If someone is rewarded for producing more documentation, more diagrams, more architectural artifacts, or more code, AI makes it easier than ever to generate enormous quantities of work. And not all of that work will be meaningful. Over-engineering has always existed in technology projects. Systems can become unnecessarily complex. Documentation can become bloated. Architecture diagrams can multiply until they obscure rather than clarify. In the past, this behavior required significant effort. With AI, the effort required to produce complexity drops dramatically. A consultant motivated purely by billable hours could theoretically flood a project with artifacts, designs, or recommendations that increase time spent while adding little practical value. AI does not create that incentive, but it amplifies it. This introduces a governance challenge that organizations will have to confront. How do you measure meaningful progress when the production of content becomes almost effortless? How do you distinguish genuine expertise from high-volume output? And how do internal teams respond when they suspect a project is being dragged along unnecessarily? These questions are not entirely new. Historically, internal engineers have sometimes been the first people to notice when consultants were extending projects unnecessarily or producing excessive work to justify continued billing. In many organizations, those concerns surfaced quietly at first. Internal staff raising questions about complexity, about timelines, about whether certain work was truly necessary. Sometimes those voices were heard, sometimes they were ignored. AI does not fundamentally change that dynamic. It simply increases the speed and scale at which work can be produced. And that means organizations will likely need stronger ways of evaluating outcomes rather than activity, measuring progress through results rather than artifacts, valuing clarity over volume. Listening carefully to internal staff who understand when complexity is helping and when it is simply growing. But the deeper organizational tensions involved here are complex. They involve incentives, leadership decisions, procurement models, and organizational culture. Those issues cannot be fully solved in a single conversation like this. They require careful thinking about how companies structure consulting engagements, how success is measured, and how internal capability evolves alongside external expertise. So while AI accelerates learning and productivity, it also shines a brighter light on an old question. What exactly are we paying consultants for? If the answer is time, the model becomes fragile in a world where AI compresses effort. If the answer is insight, judgment, and experience navigating complex systems, the value remains very real. Because even in a world where AI can explain architectures, generate code, and produce documentation at remarkable speed, organizations still face difficult decisions. What should we build? What should we simplify? What risks are we introducing? What complexity is justified and what complexity is unnecessary? Those questions cannot be answered by generating more content. They require perspective, and perhaps that is where consulting ultimately evolves, less about producing large volumes of work, more about helping organizations move confidently through complexity in a world where information is suddenly everywhere. AI may compress the time required to understand systems. But wisdom about which systems should exist in the first place still takes experience. And that experience, when used well, may become more valuable than ever.